doctors who delivered babies to their cheating mothers, what happened after. Let's dive in. Story 1. I'm not a doctor or nurse, but my ex-girlfriend gave birth while I was in the delivery room, and the baby turned out not to be mine. She was 18, and I was 19. All along, I believed I was the father. I'd taken parenting classes, read all the books, and worked nights and weekends to save every bit of money I could as a 15-year-old soon-to-be dad. Finally, the call came. She was in labor. I rushed to the ER. Thankfully, her labor wasn't long, just about 6 hours. But there was a complication. The baby had the umbilical cord around its neck. The doctor assured us everything would be fine, though the nurses were clearly preparing for the worst. The baby was delivered with a light purple hue, and the nurses quickly put a tiny oxygen mask on the newborn. The baby had to stay under observation overnight, so I stayed with my ex. The next evening, the baby was back in the room, seemingly okay. The same nurse from the night before pulled me aside and said, at risk of her job, she had to tell me something tough. The baby wasn't mine. She said while it wasn't completely obvious at that point, it would become clear in the coming weeks, as the baby was mixed race and both of us were white. Feeling overwhelmed, I woke up my ex to get the truth. Turns out, she knew there was a chance the baby wasn't mine, but had hoped it would be because it was easier, especially since her father was old-fashioned and very prejudiced. I left the hospital to clear my head. A few weeks later, I was served with child support papers. A DNA test 6 weeks later confirmed I was 0% the father. Wherever that nurse is now, I hope she's living a peaceful life. She wasn't supposed to get involved personally, but she saved me from even more heartache. Story 2. This one's from my aunt, who works as a maternity nurse. She had a couple come in, both black, and the woman gave birth to an extremely pale baby with no pigment at all. The baby was placed on the mom, who immediately started screaming that this wasn't her baby and the hospital had stolen her real child. In her defense, post-delivery confusion is very real. It wasn't that she was ignorant, just emotionally overwhelmed. Even the dad looked stunned, clearly realizing that even if she had been unfaithful, there's no way the baby would be that white. The doctors tried calming her, saying skin color can change after birth. Later, the dad called his mother, who reminded him that they had a cousin who was albino. Turns out, the baby inherited that gene. She was albino. Mystery solved. Story 3. My fiancé's father almost certainly isn't his biological dad. His mom was not a great person and didn't bother hiding the fact that she was unfaithful. But the man who raised him loved him from the start. When his mother decided, for years later, that she didn't want to raise him anymore, she handed him over to his dad and vanished. Years passed, and his dad remarried. They tried to have children, but discovered he was infertile. They adopted instead. When my fiancé was 13, his dad sat him down and told him the truth, that he might not be his biological father, and that if he ever wanted a test, they could do it. My fiancé cried and said, "I just want you to be my dad." And that was that. Story 4. I know a girl who was pregnant with her boyfriend's best friend's baby. He found out it might be the friend's about a week before the birth. After the baby arrived, I visited, and the resemblance to the friend was unmistakable. I had to tell the boyfriend. He was crushed. His parents were heartbroken too. They'd bought the girl everything, including a $500 car seat and stroller set. She refused to return any of it. She started dating the friend immediately after giving birth, and they're still together over a decade later. But here's the kicker. The boyfriend and best friend were next-door neighbors. She moved into the friend's house right after the hospital, so the ex and his family had to watch them raise that baby every single day. I can't even imagine how hard that was. Story 5. I had a vasectomy, and while chatting with the doctor, he shared a wild story. A guy with 3 kids came in for a vasectomy because he and his wife decided they were done having kids. But when the doctor went to perform the procedure, he discovered there was nothing there to snip. The guy had been born without the ability to have biological children. The poor doctor had to break the news to him. He was medically incapable of ever fathering kids. Imagine finding out that way, after raising 3 children. Brutal. Story 6. Before becoming a nurse, I worked as a lab tech. We had a set of twins in the NICU, born very prematurely. Their mother was still in the or being stitched up after a C-section, while I was drawing blood from baby B. She was wheeled over to baby A's incubator, crying, and said, "Oh, thank goodness you're not black. I've been worried for 7 months." Premature babies, especially very early ones, tend to look pink or red regardless of race. But even then, these babies showed obvious signs of being biracial. Their facial features, hair texture, and especially baby B's very prominent Mongolian spot. A few weeks later, my friend in the NICU told me those babies were now on no info status, meaning no one could give out details about them or refer to them by name. A security precaution. Apparently, there had been a huge fight. The mom's husband, a white man, noticed that the babies were biracial and realized she had been unfaithful. The actual father, a black man, had no idea she was even married. The whole situation was heartbreaking, especially for those babies. Story 7. This one's a bit lighter. My wife and I are both darker-skinned, half Mexican with dark hair. Both our moms are 100% white with light hair and eyes. So we always knew it was a bit of a coin toss how our baby would turn out. During delivery, the assisting nurse didn't know any of this. At one point, she got a little nervous and called in a more senior nurse. The second nurse came over and asked some awkward questions. Was I the father? Was anyone else expected? That kind of thing. Finally, she asked if either of us had been blonde as kids. I told her I had been, and that both grandmas were as blonde as it gets. The relief washed over her face as she showed me our baby's bright blonde head crowning. It was hilarious. Now, our baby looks just like me, if you used one of those light-skinned Instagram filters. We still get questions about his background, and my wife loves joking. Yeah, we're not sure if he's mine, just to mess with people. Their reactions are priceless. Story 8. I had a friend in college whose fiancée got pregnant. They were the perfect couple, great careers, picture-perfect life. Fast forward to the delivery room, and out comes a very black baby. He was a pale redhead, and she was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Texas girl. He made sure everyone was okay, waited for her parents to arrive, then just left. No scene, no yelling, just walked out. While she was still in the hospital, he moved all his stuff out of their home and cut off all communication. They had been together for 9 years. He moved to a different city, got a new job, and never looked back. He told me once the only comfort he had was knowing her family had already spent over $10,000 on a wedding that never happened. Coldest exit I've ever witnessed. Story 9. I used to work with a guy whose wife was pregnant. Everyone at work threw them a party, gifts, cash, well wishes, the whole 9 yards. On the way to the hospital, as her water had just broken, she turned to him in the car and told him, "It's not your baby." She asked if he could just drop her off and leave. He did exactly that. He took a few days off, found a new apartment, filed for divorce, and ghosted her completely. Word spread quickly at work. All the cards and decorations disappeared like nothing had ever happened. Unfortunately, I somehow missed the memo. On his first day back, I waltzed into the office he shared with several guys and said, "Hey Daddy-o, how's fatherhood? Got any baby pictures?" He just stared at me. The room was silent. One of his coworkers took me by the arm, pulled me out, and said, "Dude, no. Not the time. I still feel bad, and it's been 30 years. Story 10. I used to work in the newborn nursery at a hospital. Right after birth, we'd clean the babies, take their footprints, check vitals, etc. Usually the dads would come in with us. One time, a white dad came in with a newborn who was very clearly not white. Neither was the mom, from what I'd heard. He stood next to the baby while we cleaned it, completely silent. Then, in the quietest voice, he said, "I don't think this is my baby." You could see the heartbreak in his face. We gently advised him not to sign the birth certificate until he was sure. We returned the baby to the mother, and I don't know what happened after that. But man, I felt awful for him. Story 11. This one happened to my fiancée's mom, who works as a labor and delivery nurse. One day, she had a patient whose parents were present at the hospital during her stay. On the wall in the maternity wing, there was a whiteboard that listed general anonymous patient info like blood type, how far along they were, and time in the unit. It was HIPAA compliant, no names, just numbers. Since this patient was the only one in the wing at the time, her father took a glance at the board while walking back from the cafeteria. He noticed the blood type listed for his daughter, B+. That immediately raised a red flag. He knew both his and his wife's blood types, O+ and A. That combination can't produce a B+ child. He asked a nurse if the blood type listed was accurate, and when she confirmed it, he went to get his wife. He just pointed silently at the board. As soon as she saw it, a shocked look washed over her face. Right there in the maternity ward, he figured out his wife had been unfaithful, 25 years after the fact, just by knowing high school genetics. Story 12. This one's more of an academic note. I went to Marshall University, where basic genetics was part of the curriculum. In class, we used to compare students' blood types to their parents as a learning tool. It didn't take long before the school had to stop doing that. Too many students were discovering that they couldn't possibly be biologically related to the man they'd always called Dad. I only heard the fallout stories secondhand, but they were apparently pretty rough. A lot of quiet, awkward phone calls after class. Story 13. This didn't happen to me, but to a friend in high school. She got pregnant and claimed that the baby's father was the local doctor's teenage son. The doctor, being a proud soon-to-be grandpa, offered to deliver the baby himself for free. When the child was born, it was very clear that the baby was part African American. The doctor's son and the girl were both white. To his credit, the doctor still delivered the baby and didn't charge anything. I think he was just relieved that his 14-year-old son wasn't actually going to be a dad. Story 14. I'm a labor and delivery nurse, and let me tell you, not everyone knows that black babies can be born much lighter than they'll eventually be. It's pretty common for their skin tone to deepen over the first few weeks. That said, I've seen more than a few deliveries where the father takes one look at the light-skinned baby and immediately starts accusing the mom of cheating. It can get really dramatic really fast, all because of simple biology they weren't aware of. Story 15. I work in anesthesia, and a colleague of mine had this wild story. During a delivery, everything went normally, until after the baby was born. The OBGYN turned to the father and said, "Congratulations, Steve." The man paused, then replied, "My name's not Steve." Turns out, the mom had a tattoo right above her private area that read Steve's lunchbox. Yikes. That must have been an awkward ride home. Story 16. When my son was born, he came out looking really tan, and both my ex-girlfriend and I are very pale. For a moment, I seriously thought she had cheated on me. Fast forward to today, we're no longer together, for unrelated reasons, and our son is now a pasty white kid. He must have gotten an extreme in-womb suntan, because he definitely belongs to us. Story 17. Back when I worked at an army hospital on Fort Lewis, a woman came in complaining of abdominal pain. After examining her, we found out she was 10 weeks pregnant. Her husband was standing at her bedside and suddenly started laughing. He grabbed his coat, turned to her and said, "Well, that's that, Brittany," and walked out. Turns out he had been deployed in Afghanistan until just 3 weeks earlier. The math didn't lie, that baby wasn't his. Honestly, I always appreciated how classy and calm he was in that moment, even though it must have hurt. Story 18. I'm a nurse in labor and delivery, and honestly, if a mom suspects the baby might not be her partner's, we usually see a friend or sister come in for the delivery instead of the dad. Then the father will be invited later, after the baby is born. Gives everyone a chance to gauge reactions. Babies' appearances can change quickly, so there's not always certainty right away. I once had a black couple, and the dad was upset the baby was so light-skinned, until his own mother smacked him and reminded him that he looked exactly like that as a baby. Another time, a Hispanic woman came in with her boyfriend, his sister, and a friend. The boyfriend seemed kind of disengaged, but that's not unusual. After the baby was born, and he left to grab a few things, the sister pulled me aside. She didn't want to use a translator, so she pulled out her phone and typed in Google Translate, "How can we get a paternity test at the hospital?" I explained that we don't do that here, but you can pick up a DNA test at a pharmacy for around $50. She said the baby didn't look like the mom's first child, who was the boyfriend's, and they wanted to be sure before saying anything. Happens more than you'd think. Story 19. When I was born, my very fair-skinned white parents were greeted by an Indian doctor who looked at me and said, "Ooh, she looks like an ethnic baby." Looking back, it's a funny story, but I imagine it wasn't so amusing for my dad in the moment, especially since I had a full head of thick black hair and darker skin. Over time, my hair lightened, and so did my skin. Turns out, I was very much their biological child. But I've always wondered if my dad had a few quiet doubts during those early weeks. Story 20. I'm a nurse in a level 4 NICU. We take care of the sickest newborns in the region. One case still sticks with me. We had a baby come in who was extremely sick, septic, with a blood infection from herpes. In most cases, if a mom has herpes, she's treated during pregnancy to avoid passing it on to the baby. But this mom didn't even know she had the virus. That's when it hit everyone in the room. The herpes didn't come from her. It came from the baby's father, who had contracted it during an affair and unknowingly passed it to her, and then to the baby. So while this poor woman was watching her newborn fight for its life, she also had to find out that her husband had cheated and was the reason their child was so sick. Absolutely devastating. Story 21. My best friend was dating a girl and ended up getting her pregnant. They got engaged and planned to marry shortly after the baby was born. About 10 of us were in the hospital waiting room, ready to celebrate. After a couple of hours, he walked out with a smirk and simply said, "Let's go." At first, we thought something had gone wrong. Her friends asked how the baby was, and he calmly said, "He's fine, but he's black." Then he motioned for us to follow him to the parking garage. Once we were in his car, he texted me and asked if he could crash at my place for a while. We helped him move his stuff out of their apartment within an hour. Her parents didn't even know what to say. They were completely confused when he told them the baby was black. It was clear he wasn't the father, and everyone was blindsided. Story 22. I'm not a nurse, but my professor used to be one in labor and delivery. She told us a story that still makes me laugh, though I'm sure it was chaos at the time. There was a man literally running back and forth between two delivery rooms. Turns out, both women were in labor at the same time, and he had gotten them both pregnant. The twist? One was his wife, and the other was his girlfriend. The girlfriend actually gave birth 10 minutes before the wife, even though she had gotten pregnant later. Apparently, the wife was furious that the girlfriend's baby came first. Labor and delivery can be intense, and in some cases, full of soap opera-level drama. Story 23. This one's from my grandmother, who worked as a nurse. She was helping deliver a baby, and the man present, who believed he was the father, commented, "Wow, the baby looks great for being premature." Without thinking, my grandma replied, "That baby's not premature." The room went silent. The implication hit immediately. If the baby wasn't premature, the timeline didn't add up. Definitely one of those oops moments where her honesty got a little ahead of her tact. Apparently, that kind of social obliviousness runs in our family. Story 24. This happened to me. When my son was about 7 months old, I had a DNA test done. Not because I didn't love him, but because his mom had constantly told me he wasn't mine, yet still came after me for child support. Test results came back. He was mine. I got a lawyer and went to court. For months later, she was arrested on charges of distributing illegal substances in the home where my son was living. I ended up getting custody when he was 11 months old. What followed was a 2-year legal battle to prevent the state from giving custody back to her. Eventually, the juvenile court transferred the case to district court, where I fought for full custody. During that time, she took him for a visit, got arrested for domestic violence in another city, and was found with drug paraphernalia. That was the last time she saw him unsupervised. She was in and out of jail for years, barely called, and only visited for minutes at a time. Eventually, she went to prison for 3 years. She's out now, and seems to be doing better. I let her have supervised visits, because that's what my son wants. Despite everything, I'm trying to let go of the past and give her a shot, but I'll never stop protecting my kid. Story 25. My wife is an RN and a hospital supervisor. At their hospital, Code Yellow is an overhead call that means security and large male staff need to respond immediately. It's rare, but every now and then you'll hear Code Yellow, labor and delivery, over the intercom. And when you do, you already know what's going down. Let's just say the baby doesn't always look like the dad was expecting. Story 26. Not quite a hospital story, but still intense. My friend found out after years of marriage, and having 2 young kids, that his wife had been cheating with multiple men. They were all white, so there weren't any obvious signs at first. But once he learned there was a chance that neither child was his, he bought 2 paternity test kits. Then it hit him. He was ready for both to be his, or both to not be. But he had no idea how he'd handle it if only one was. That possibility broke him. So he threw both tests away and never took them. They got divorced, and he's now remarried to someone amazing. Story 27. This one's about a distant cousin of mine. She was adopted as a baby and had some developmental delays due to exposure before birth. She's white and married a dark-skinned Latino man years ago. They had a son who clearly looked like both of them, dark hair, skin, and eyes. But things got complicated later. Her husband, let's call him Javier, went overseas with the military. When he returned after 6 months, his wife was already 4 months pregnant. When the baby was born, it had pale skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. Everyone in the family knew what had happened. The baby was not his. In fact, It later came out the biological father was her ex-boyfriend from high school. Still, Javier chose to raise the baby as his own. A few years later, it happened again, another baby, also blonde and blue-eyed. But Javier remains convinced they're his. It's sad in a way, but he loves them and takes care of them like any father would. Story 28. One of my favorite stories is from a courtroom case. A woman stood up in court and spent nearly 25 minutes passionately trying to prove that a man was the father of her child. She pointed out facial similarities, brought in character witnesses, and said he was just avoiding responsibility. Through it all, the man said nothing, just stood silently. Finally, the judge asked him if he had anything to say. Without a word, he handed the judge a manila folder. The judge opened it, read for a moment, and dismissed the case in his favor. Turns out, he had been deployed in Afghanistan for the entire year leading up to, and during, her pregnancy. He had proof. The baby was almost 2 years old by the time he came home. He never needed to raise his voice, he just let the facts speak for him. Story 29. My brother's friend, who was in the army, had a quick wedding with a woman he'd only been dating a few months. She was white, and so was he, but when their baby was born, the child was clearly black. She insisted the baby was his, and even guilt-tripped him for questioning it. Said he was being cruel and a bad dad for doubting her. When the paternity test came back, it proved without a doubt that the baby wasn't his. Turned out she thought she could stay with him for that army paycheck, but the truth caught up with her. Story 30. A coworker's aunt recently found out that the man who raised her wasn't actually her biological father. She had gotten really into genealogy and decided to take an ancestry DNA test to help map out her family tree. When she got the results, none of the paternal matches lined up. She asked her dad casually if he recognized any of the surnames, and he only recognized one. The name of the maintenance man who worked at the apartment complex they lived in right after her parents got married. He said the guy was always around and used to flirt with his wife. Her mom passed away a few years ago, so she never brought it up again. But she knew what the results meant, and decided to just let her dad keep believing what he always had. Story 31. My brother told me a story about a co-worker of his from Eastern Europe who had moved to the US and started a family. His son met a sweet girl, they got married, and were expecting a baby. The entire extended family was overjoyed. But when the baby was born, he was significantly darker than either parent. The new father was absolutely crushed. In a rage, he accused his wife of cheating, said the child wasn't his, and stormed out of the hospital. He returned home to his family, completely heartbroken, yelling that his wife had betrayed him. Everyone was shocked. Then, out of nowhere, the old grandmother in the corner spoke up. She told a story none of them had ever heard. Back during the war, she had a relationship with a black French soldier and got pregnant. When he was sent away, she married someone else and passed the child off as her new husband's. That child was the baby's father. Turns out, the dark-skinned gene had just skipped a generation and popped back up. The family brought the young dad back to the hospital, grandma in tow with a picture of her old flame. Everyone made peace, and he accepted the baby as his own, now understanding where the surprise had come from. Story 32. I was working in a hospital and did a routine blood type test on a newborn. The mother was O+, and the baby came back as AB+. That combo isn't genetically possible. It sent me into panic mode. I thought we'd accidentally mixed up babies, and that we were going to be sued. I reran the test 3 times just to be sure, then called the floor and said they might have switched blood samples, or worse, babies. The nurse calmly explained that the baby came from a donor egg, which explained everything. Once I retested with the correct info, everything matched perfectly. Huge relief, but definitely gave me a scare at first. Story 33. This happened to someone I knew. He was about to break up with his girlfriend when she told him she was pregnant. Even though their relationship was rocky, he wanted to do the right thing and stayed. After the baby was born, it became clear the child wasn't his. She had been with someone else. He kicked her out and ended things completely. Turns out, the biological father was a deadbeat who didn't stick around either. It was a really sad situation, but he made the right choice in walking away. Story 34. My dad once got accused of being the father of a mixed-race baby by a woman he had slept with. She insisted the baby was his, even though both she and my dad were white, and the baby clearly wasn't. The case actually ended up on the Trisha show, kind of like an older version of the Maury or Jeremy Kyle show. When the DNA results came in, it turned out my dad wasn't the father. At one point, Trisha asked him, "Do you have any other kids?" And he just smirked. To this day, we still don't know how many children my dad may have out there. It's entirely possible I went to school with a half-sibling without even knowing. Story 35. My cousin met a woman while in rehab. They started dating, and she got pregnant, but the baby clearly wasn't his. Even so, he signed the birth certificate and raised the child as his own. Fast forward 7 years. He's been sober the entire time and has had sole custody for 6 of those years. He loves that little girl deeply and says she completely changed his life. Even though she isn't his biologically, he's her dad in every way that matters. Story 36. This happened to a friend of mine. He and his on-again, off-again girlfriend were in one of their on phases when she got pregnant. She swore the baby was his, and he even moved in with her and her mom. After the baby was born, he took a paternity test. While waiting for the results, everyone was thrilled about the baby, including his family. At one point, he casually mentioned the test to his girlfriend's mom. Her mom said, "Oh, she didn't tell you? The results came back a while ago. The baby's yours." He was relieved, or so he thought. Months later, while packing to move out, he found the paternity test hidden in a box. The baby wasn't his. He left immediately and tried to stay involved in the child's life, but the mother wouldn't allow it. Really sad all around. Story 37. My husband and I were visiting friends at the hospital after they had their baby. We're the godparents. We were standing in the hallway with both sets of grandparents, just chatting and celebrating. Apparently, the hospital has a rule. Only 5 visitors are allowed in that area at a time. There were 6 of us, but a security guard had let it slide. Then this stern nurse walked up, counted us, and said someone would have to leave immediately. She turned to my husband and asked, "Oh, are you the daddy?" Without missing a beat, he replied, "That's what we're all trying to figure out." The nurse's face went pale, and she backed away in complete silence. We all burst out laughing as soon as she left. My husband's timing is flawless. Story 38. Not a medical professional, but I know of a case that made it all the way to our state's highest court. A black man and a white woman were married. They separated, and she moved out of state. Around 9 months later, he got a call from a relative saying she was about to give birth. He rushed across the country to be there. But when the baby was born, it was white, with red hair and blue eyes. She tried to claim it was a trick baby, but he understandably left. Later, her parental rights were terminated due to neglect, and the state wanted to place the child for adoption. Because they had still been married at the time of birth, he was the legal father, and they had to notify him. DNA testing showed the baby was not his, and yet, the state still terminated his parental rights too for abandonment. No happy ending there. Just an unfair legal mess. Story 39. My niece's parents are an interesting combo. Her mom is a mix of Eastern and Western European ancestry, basically white, and her husband is Dutch and Jamaican. They have 2 kids together. Their daughter has skin like Halle Berry, beautiful brown complexion. But their son? He's pale with bright red hair. They're full biological siblings, just a genetic lottery at play. It's a good reminder that you can't always assume anything based on how siblings look. Story 40. This story is from my brother's OB/GYN rotation. He was assisting a woman during birth who asked for her husband to leave the room. A little unusual, but not unheard of. When the baby was delivered, both parents were white, but the baby was very clearly black. She then asked the doctor to stay and explain it to her husband when he came back. My brother noped out of there immediately, didn't want to be part of that confrontation. She really played the odds all the way to the end, hoping it wouldn't be obvious. It was. Story 41. I was working in labor and delivery and helped care for a young girl who came in to give birth. Her parents were with her. The dad kept saying things like, she should have had an abortion, while the mom silently cried. During labor, we got a call from a nervous-sounding boy, her boyfriend, asking if he could speak to her. He said her father wouldn't let him come to the hospital. I gave her the message, and she showed me a photo of him, a small, pale, red-headed boy. Later, her gym teacher showed up to check on her. He was tall, muscular, with deep brown skin, total opposite of the boyfriend. When the baby was born, he was unmistakably black. The girl kept apologizing to her dad over and over, saying, "I'm sorry, Daddy." The mom took one look at the baby and walked out, praying for forgiveness. Her dad almost passed out. I had to sit him down, calm everyone, and refer them to the hospital counselor. Turns out the girl had only kissed her boyfriend, but had been secretly involved with the teacher. I reported it, since it clearly crossed the line into inappropriate conduct. The baby was later placed for adoption. This happened back in 1989, but I still think about her and hope she's okay. Story 42. Not a doctor myself, but my mom worked in a medical lab years ago. One day, a woman from another department was chatting with the lab staff and casually mentioned that her blood type was X, her husband's was Y, and their child's was Z. One of the younger lab techs blurted out, "That's impossible." The whole room went quiet. The supervising doctor shot him a glare that could cut steel. Thankfully, the woman didn't seem to catch on or care. But my mom still talks about that moment as one of the most awkward things she ever witnessed in her career. Story 43. A friend of mine was told by doctors that he had about a 0.1% chance of getting someone pregnant. So when his girlfriend told him she was expecting, we were all super excited, though a little surprised. He's mixed, she's white and blonde, and the baby was born pale with bright red hair. The paternity clinic even gave him a $250 discount on the test because, based on appearances alone, they were almost certain the baby wasn't his. Well, turns out he was the father. 100% his. Just a wild roll of the genetic dice. Now he has a beautiful red-haired daughter, and one heck of a story to tell. Story 44. I was working a delivery for a dark-skinned black couple expecting their first child. As the baby started crowning, I noticed something strange. The baby's head was completely white. At first, everyone thought it was just vernix, the white waxy stuff newborns are covered in. But even after cleaning, the skin underneath was still pale. The dad kept asking, "When's the baby going to darken up?" But it wasn't a matter of lighting or temporary color. The baby was born with albinism. Both parents were totally confused, as neither had ever seen that in their families. But it's genetic and can happen. We explained it, and they adjusted, but the surprise on their faces was unforgettable. Story 45. This one's about my great-grandmother. She lived in a very poor area near a military base during World War I and World War II, and worked as an escort to survive. She was apparently quite popular and didn't discriminate. Race, nationality didn't matter. Her first husband found out she was the local escort when her baby was born obviously mixed race, even though they were both white. They divorced, and she later married another man who was okay with her past, for a while. In total, she had 11 known living children, but only 2 were fully white. Hospital staff used to make bets about what ethnicity the next baby would be: Black, Native American, Hispanic, etc. By the time she was older, she had gone through 5 husbands and several boyfriends. It's a story the family still tells today, half in disbelief, half in admiration for how she managed to keep things together despite the chaos. Story 46. I'm not a doctor or nurse, but I'm the kid in this story. My dad is black, my mom is white. But when I was born, I looked completely white, pale skin, straight hair. Nothing about me suggested mixed heritage. My dad panicked and left, assuming my mom had cheated. Years later, a DNA test confirmed I was, in fact, his child. Even today, I look more Italian or Latino than mixed. It's strange how genetics work. I just didn't get many visible traits from him. But I am his son. 100%. And now we're back in touch. Story 47. I have olive-toned skin and my partner is very fair. We're both Latino, but our appearances are pretty different. We had 2 very light-skinned boys who looked just like him, and then we had a daughter who came out with darker skin. My father and brothers are dark-skinned, and my mom was caramel-toned like me, so I wasn't surprised. But others were. I got a lot of side-eye in the hospital. One nurse even asked me if my partner was really the father. Super inappropriate, but I let it slide. Now that our daughter's a bit older, she looks exactly like her dad, just the tanned version. No one asks questions anymore. Story 48. Not a medical story exactly, but a funny hospital moment. My stepdad and I were in the cancer ward for a nerve block procedure. While we were waiting, the doctor came in, looked at the 2 of us, and said, "Wow, it's amazing how much your son looks like you." My stepdad just nodded and smiled. As soon as the doctor left, we burst out laughing. I'm not biologically related to him, but the doc really thought we were twins. Story 49. My sister got pregnant in high school. The father was white, but he wasn't involved. A few months later, she started dating her now husband, a black guy, when she was already 5 months along. After the baby was born, we were all visiting at the hospital. My sister was still recovering from a C-section, and her boyfriend, now husband, picked up the baby to hold her. A nurse walked in and said, "She should darken up in a few days." We all just nodded and smiled. She clearly thought he was the dad and had no idea the baby was already mixed. Now they have 2 more daughters together, and he adopted her first child a few years later. It's a sweet story, even if it started with a little confusion. Story 50. This happened when I was about 12. My cousin had a child with her white boyfriend, but the baby came out black. It confused everyone. Turns out, the boyfriend was albino. He was genetically black, but appeared white due to albinism. It was one of those situations that made 0 sense until it made perfect sense. Genetics will really keep you on your toes. Story 51. This one's wild and not what you're expecting. It wasn't infidelity, but an IVF mix-up. A friend of mine and his wife went through in vitro fertilization. Everything seemed normal, until the baby was born and looked nothing like either of them. After testing, they found out the embryo had been switched at the clinic. The baby wasn't biologically related to either of them. Total nightmare. They had to go through legal processes and emotional recovery. It wasn't anyone cheating, just a devastating human error. Story 52. This one's heartbreaking. A young couple, she was 18, he was 19, were expecting a baby. The guy worked constantly, doing everything he could to prepare for his daughter's arrival. His parents even let the girlfriend move in and helped them turn the spare room into a nursery. When the baby was born, she was clearly mixed race, and the father wasn't. He was absolutely devastated. He had invested so much into preparing for fatherhood, only to find out at the very end that the baby wasn't his. I'll never forget how crushed he looked. Story 53. I had a friend from Africa who married a white woman. She already had 3 kids from a previous relationship with an Asian man. A few years into the marriage, she gave birth to a baby who looked very Asian, just like her other kids. My friend kept insisting the baby was his, and even said he had taken a paternity test. But during a family gathering, his aunt came to visit from Africa. When he brought up the paternity test in front of everyone, his aunt said, "I don't care what the test says, that child is not yours." A couple of years later, they had another child together who clearly was his. That family gathering story still gets retold to this day. Story 54. I'm a NICU nurse, and I've seen all kinds of paternity situations. One time, both parents were white, but the baby was clearly mixed race. The dad acted like he didn't notice anything, just stayed in total denial. I've also cared for a couple who knew the baby wasn't biologically his, and he still planned to adopt the child. They were young, but incredibly mature about it. Sometimes moms even quietly tell me the baby isn't the dad's, but they haven't said anything to him yet. Because of HIPAA, I can't say anything either. In those cases, I just have to stay professional and keep things neutral. It's a strange position to be in sometimes. Story 55. I knew a guy who was in a relationship with a woman who got pregnant. For 8 months after the baby was born, he raised the child as his own, totally bonded. Then he found out he wasn't the biological father. Even after that, he chose to stay and raise the child. Fast forward a few years, she got pregnant again. But this time, when the baby was born, it had very dark skin, even though both of them were white. The entire room went dead silent. The mom didn't even want to touch the baby for the first day. That was when he finally walked away. Story 56. I work in marketing for a housing company and was filming resident testimonials. One couple, probably in their 40s, told us they had just downsized because their kids were finally out of the house. Off camera, they joked, "We couldn't wait to start this next chapter, but then we accidentally had a 3rd kid." The husband laughed and added, "Those vasectomies don't always work." I still knocked her up. The wife froze, eyes wide, looking completely panicked. We all went quiet. I honestly still don't know if they were joking or if he'd been raising someone else's kid for 18 years without knowing it. Either way, I didn't ask any follow-up questions. Story 57. I was doing epidurals during my residency at a rural hospital. A white couple came in. They didn't seem super educated. The wife was anxious, constantly asking when she could go home, even before the baby was delivered. The husband looked bored and detached, like he'd been through it before. Normally I wouldn't be in the room during the delivery, but I stuck around in case more medication was needed. When the baby was born, the mom had her eyes closed and didn't want to look. That was unusual. When I looked at the baby, it was very clearly black. The husband started repeating louder and louder, "When is that baby going to pink up?" The OB tried to stay calm and suggested taking the baby to the NICU. He asked the dad to step out while they repaired the mom. Security and a social worker were called. I was needed elsewhere, so I never found out exactly how it ended, but I doubt it was peaceful. Story 58. I'm a veterinarian, not a human doctor, but the situation is surprisingly similar. A female dog will go into heat, and any male dog that gets to her might be the father. Owners often have no clue who the actual dad is. A few months later, boom, puppies. And suddenly everyone's scrambling to find homes for them. So yeah, even in the animal world, paternity can be a mystery. Story 59. This happened to my mom. My biological dad is Greek, very pale, and my mom is white with mixed European ancestry. When I was born, I had very dark skin and jet black hair. My dad didn't say anything, but his mother was furious. She accused my mom and grandma of cheating and stormed out. My dad left us when I was 3 weeks old with no explanation. A few months later, my hair fell out, my skin lightened, and it turned out I really was his kid. We later tried to reconnect during my teen years. At first, it went okay. But then he got weird, showing up uninvited at friends' houses, demanding to be called dad, and wanting family photos with all 6 of his other kids, none of whom share a mother. Eventually, I cut him off. My husband's parents fired him from their business after finding out who he was. Honestly, I'm glad they did. He had it coming. Story 60. Not medical, but a wild family story. My partner's youngest sibling got really sick and was hospitalized. The whole family rushed to be with him. When we arrived, everyone had clearly been crying. I thought the worst had happened. Their dad pulled us aside and said, "He's okay, but we need to talk." Turns out, he had to confess, he wasn't actually the biological father of 3 of the siblings. The hospital needed blood tests for something, and that's when the truth came out. The kids were in their mid to late 20s. It really shook them up. Total life twist they never saw coming. Story 61. I'm a med-surg nurse, and I had an older male patient with dangerously low hemoglobin who needed a blood transfusion. We follow a strict 2-nurse protocol before hanging blood, confirming name, ID, and blood type. While we were confirming his type, his daughter, who was visiting, suddenly looked alarmed. She said she was AB, and her mom was type A, so her dad couldn't possibly be type O. I explained that the match was correct, and she grew quiet, clearly doing the math in her head. Later, we ordered another match to double-check. Sure enough, the results were consistent. The daughter sat in the corner, stunned. Her mom and dad didn't seem to catch on, but she definitely did. She just found out, while visiting her sick father, that he wasn't biologically her dad.